insofar as Christians admire and praise such a being, aren't they in many ways worse than neo-Nazis?
The answer is no.
Next question.
This question is a confusion of context. The God of Christianity is not punishing where you had originally not only Jews but everyone, because he is the God of all people. Okay? Not because of ethnocentric position, not because of culture, not because of some extrinsic behavior, but because specifically, if you want to use the nature of worship, it is just that, the very essence and nature of what worship is. It is that fellowship and communion with God. So this is dealing not with a matter of strictly in a legalistic sense, but it's what is a man and what is God? Well, if God is, to use the phrase, if he is the spirit of life, then proper worship is to be in sync with that life. To be out of that worship would be to be out of sync with that life, and by necessity of nature is to be in state of death. So that'd be a spiritual death, which would eventually be physical in that respect, but that's on the side point. So God is not merely doing this out of some abstract legalistic sense, but it is a matter of nature, in the same way that if I drop a rock, it's going to fall by nature. It must fall by the laws of gravity. So by the laws of God's nature, being a moralistic one, to be immoral is going to have the same manner of consequences. Now, in terms of carrying that over into the extreme, being just typically called hell, the doctrine of hell, or as you had it, eternal damnation, the punishment of extreme torture, there are several ways of addressing this. Now, first off, do we have anything that would bring it more bearable to our mind of how we can understand the, as it were, the length of time? Let's just begin with the length of time of which hell is in duration, okay? If I were to take a baseball bat and go hit one of these people, and I tell these people, audience, I would be arrested for maybe attempted manslaughter, definitely assault and battery, and let's just say it's at some extreme, they put me in jail for a year and they fine me so much. But now I do the same thing. I take a baseball bat and I go and I hit a police officer. Well, maybe 5 to 10 years for that one. That's really bad. But let's just say I'm very nimble and I can strike the president with a baseball bat. Now, they may just lock me up and throw away the key at that point. So what's the difference? It's the same crime. I hit with a baseball bat 3 people, 3 men, and yet each one took greater punishment. The difference we find is their authority, their dignity, or the value of that person. Well, if God is of an infinite authority, an infinite dignity, an infinite value, then it's only reasonable that the consequence should be of proportional degree. In terms of the extreme torment of this, to go together with the duration, well, there's at least 2 ways to look at this. One is to say, well, we're assuming that the punishment in hell is for finite temporal crimes, but what about, let's say, in hell they continue to commit crimes? Well, then it's not necessarily that they're being punished for these crimes at one specific time, but they're continually being punished for an infinite number of crimes. And finally, in the nature, again, going back to the nature of God as the spirit of life and the nature of man to be in communion with him, to be receiving and receptive of that life. We have, if we could use the imagery of light, we got good light up here and it's a dark room. What happens when you turn a light on in a dark room? There is a violent reaction there. There is a violent, the light crushes out the darkness, and it's exactly how we define hell. We have God who would be, to use the imagery, pure light, pure holiness, and he's coming into the midst in the presence of unholiness, of darkness, and so we can understand how that would be an extreme manner of dissidence, if you might put it that way. So just by the nature of this, this is what we would expect to find.
Just a footnote that just so you know, the doctrine of hell is in fact an optional doctrine. It's not in the early Christian creeds, with the exception of the Apostles' Creed, and even then it's used of Jesus. Origen in the 2nd and 3rd centuries had expressed that all persons would eventually be saved. And so, the doctrine of hell stands at the periphery. If that were the obstacle for keeping one from believing in Christianity, I would be more comfortable with getting rid of that and embracing those things that appear to be truer. And then that can be dealt with as a secondary basis.
Okay, but before you get into a general response, respond to that exact point. Is it true then that perhaps this notion of evil on behalf of God, does that simply require changing your theological beliefs, or does that actually imply that God as a whole wouldn't exist?
I mean, look, so again, we get back to this inference to the best explanation argument. Now, do I really believe that there's a morally perfect being who exists, who thinks that this is a suitable kind of punishment for what amounts to basically insubordination? No, I mean, it's again, what I believe is that this is something that is evidence of where this doctrine comes from. It's a kind of human creation, and it's something that gets added on as a kind of self-preservation mechanism that a lot of religions tack on to make people fearful, and therefore you need to believe this. You ought to believe this, because if you don't believe this, something really bad is going to happen. It seems to me that's a much more plausible explanation for what's going on than to suppose that a morally perfect, loving, good, ultimately perfectly just being thinks that it's appropriate to inflict this kind of torment on people simply because they didn't love him in the right way. So it's more of an evidential argument again about where this kind of doctrine came from.
Yeah, and just a lot about what Jordan was saying. You know, he was making an analogy between, you know, hitting someone with a baseball bat, hitting the president with a baseball bat. I don't really think the analogy fits here, okay? I don't really consider myself, you know, making an aggressive attempt at, like, attacking God. All I see is never accepting the belief in the first place. So as far as you're comparing it to an aggressive attack on a person, and so yes, that should be punished more and more depending on the degree of the respect of the person or whatever you said. You know, let's look at a benevolent agnostic. You know, someone who is philanthropic, considered by most to be a good person, unless perhaps they find out they're agnostic and they consider that a moral crime, which is fair. That's possible. Some people would say that. But, you know, that person, this benevolent agnostic person, they just suspend judgment because either they don't have the time to look into it and they don't want to place a judgment without proper knowledge. That's fine. So they suspend judgment on God. They end up being punished eternally for that. That's like someone not knowing whether or not they want to hit the president with a baseball bat or not. Like, yeah, maybe I do, maybe I don't. I really like him, but I don't really know enough about his tax law, whatever. I'm not going to hit him, but I kind of maybe should. So that's like the benevolent agnostic, you know. And you're saying that person deserves to go to a prison for not only until they die, but no, for eternity, and to literally suffer the most extreme torment possible for eternity, for suspending judgment on whether to hit the president with a baseball bat.
The answer would be no, because that's not the manner in which we put it. It's not a matter of an innocent person or an ignorant person offending God. That's where we would have such things as, now this is, again, optional. Just in-house debate among Christians is, where do babies go when they die? Do they go to heaven or hell? Now we accept very strongly, and we evidence it from the scriptures, that all babies do go to heaven. So they are exempt